So a good example would have been STS-27. It's the second flight after the Challenger disaster. So we returned to flight, and this STS-27 mission was a Department of Defense mission. Hoot Gibson was the commander, and they got to space. And during the ascent, the right tip of the solid rocket motor, the tip had disintegrated under air loads. And so the debris from the disintegrating nose cone fell back and struck the right underside of the orbiter. Of course, nobody saw that or felt it during the ascent, but camera footage detected it back on the ground as they looked at the film. And so they radioed up from Houston and said, hey, we would like you to take the robot arm and look at the upper right wing just below the cockpit and tell us what you see on the underside of the right wing. And when the crew got the arm out and deployed it and turned on the TV camera, the first time they looked at the TV monitors in the cabin, Hoot Gibson says in his reminiscence that he looked at the TV screen and he said, we're all going to die, because the hundreds of tiles had been damaged by that debris striking the orbiter. And with the limitations of the TV on the robot arm, it's somewhat grainy, and it wasn't high resolution, and the lighting wasn't perfect, and so on. Even with that, they could tell that they had sustained some serious damage. So Hoot and the crew told the ground about this, and they downlinked some of the video. But unfortunately, because it was a classified mission, they had encryption systems in the communications link that degraded the video, perhaps, so that mission control didn't really see the full fidelity of what the crew was seeing. And they came back to the crew with the stunning advice that, oh, it all looks good to us, and you're certified for a normal reentry. And they couldn't understand why they weren't more worried about what they were obviously seeing on this video. So there were some communications gaps that the crew had to deal with and try to understand. But in the end, you have to come home. And there was no alternative about sending a rescue shuttle up or doing some spacewalks. There was no repair technique to patch damaged tiles at that point. So they had to come home. And so Hoot tells the story about how all the way during reentry, he had in the back of his mind, we might be seeing any second now the critical traces of this damage that are going to spin us out of control, and we'll lose our lives here. And I think the thing that I admire most about that story is that Hoot did not dump all of this worry and anxiety on the rest of the crew members. He just said, okay, we're going to do our jobs, and we're going to watch everything, but don't worry about it. We're going to do our jobs and we'll come through. And so I don't think Guy Gardner, who told me most of the story of this mission as the pilot, I don't think he was as concerned about losing his life as Hoot was. But Hoot's right up front in his interview on video about this. And he says that it was nerve-wracking to watch the shuttle perform all the way through reentry and wonder if this was the last 30 seconds of the flight. When they got on the ground, they found that one pile was completely missing, and the plasma heat had almost burned through the skin of the orbiter at that point. So they came very close to a penetration of hot gas into the orbiter. And if it had hit some critical subsystem, they might have gone out of control. And experienced what Columbia did in 2003.
And that's what I was going to say is we have the hindsight of knowing when it goes catastrophically wrong with Columbia. If they had lost another orbiter after the Challenger, that would have been it. There's no way those things would have kept flying.
Yeah, 2 losses in 3 flights, that would have been the end of the shuttle program. And for a long time, it would have been the end of U.S. human spaceflight. So, yeah. But the tragic thing about it was that even despite the damage, and there are pictures of the crew standing on the runway looking at the damage with shock on their faces, and the same on the ground support crew there, everybody was astounded at the damage that the shuttle had sustained. About 600 tiles, I think, were damaged, including the one that was fully missing. They were very lucky. But, by 2003, NASA had forgotten about that and how close that shuttle came to being lost. And so when they observed the ascent damage to Columbia, they saw the impact but couldn't identify the damage from the ground. And they did not treat that potential of a catastrophe with the seriousness that it deserved. And while it would have been very difficult to rescue the Columbia crew, there was at least a small chance of making that attempt. And yet that was never considered at the time in 2003, because we'd forgotten how close we'd come, and people didn't view foam impact to the heat shield as something that could be a catastrophe.